Hi, hello, how are you? This is Coach Aaron Saft in the Running His Life podcast. My guest today is a Moab 240 finisher, his first 200 plus miler. And really, he as he'll tell you, he didn't really have much 100-mile experience prior to this. Matter of fact, he did a couch to 100-mile event, which he talks about, and things he learned from it, and things he learned from this event. Really enjoyed this conversation with Ellis Pace. Ellis came to me for coaching for this specific event, and it was amazing sharing this journey with him and watching his growth and just seeing what athlete, how much endurance he gained, watching as he talks about his paces drop while his heart rate remained at a constant. It was phenomenal. I really enjoyed this experience with him, and we talk about his training, we talk about the race, we talk about so many things in this conversation. It is quite a long one, so brace yourselves. If you're going to listen to this one, it might need to be on the long run. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ellis. Afterwards, we're going to dive into another topic. We're going to talk metrics and their involvement in our training. And this is going to be kind of a 2, maybe 3-part piece. I'm trying to include a really good conversation with an athlete that I hope you're going to have a bunch of takeaways from, and then try to teach you a little bit about our training principles. So stay tuned at the end for that. So here we go. Here's my interview with Ellis Pace and the Moab 240. Welcome to the podcast for the first time, Mr. Ellis Pace. Ellis, thank you for joining me today. I'm glad to see that you have recovered and are alert.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Took a couple days, but finally we're back to normal. It feels like normal at least.
This was Ellis's first 200. He has done 100 in the past. So, Ellis, why don't you take us back and kind of give us an outline of your past, athletically, personally, whatever you want to share there.
Yeah, absolutely. So been somewhat of an athlete my entire life. Kind of been in the track space starting in high school. However, my main sport was football. So I spent a lot of time strength training and a lot of speed training, quick twitch muscle training. And then I got into track in high school, but I was actually a short distance. So I was a sprint guy, which was 100 meter, 200 meter strictly, nothing beyond that. Then I ended up going to college to run track originally and also play football, where I was a running back and then did the 100 meter, 200 meter in college.
Where was that?
That was at East Carolina. So I did 1 year at East Carolina University and then ended up not really liking the size of it. So I ended up transferring to Wofford and finished out at Wofford my last 3 years. So I spent the majority of my time training for football, which was a lot of just, a lot of strength training, a lot of quick twitch muscle stuff. The idea of even running really like a 5K at that point in my life was kind of unthinkable. Just because I was such a short distance guy and it was all about speed and quick twitch stuff. And then I graduated and got into, regular day life, adulthood. And, lifting weights is fun, but I just wasn't gaining anything from it and I didn't have any goals. So I started to train for a half marathon back in 2018 and it kind of just carried over from there. The half marathon turned into a marathon, which is usually what happens, I think.
Yes.
And then I spent probably 2 to 3 years doing nothing but Ironmans.
Well,
So my training was just based around Ironmans. And then COVID hit, and those kind of just got hard to do for a little while. And the training was getting a little excessive with the swimming and the biking. And then the biking started to scare me a little bit on the roads, so I decided to stop that. And then I actually got a wild hair one day and went and just did a 100 miler without any training. Which it was a 24-hour race, and you get a buckle if you get 100 miles. And that was down in, I think, Taylor, South Carolina, like the Saddle Creek Stumble or something like that. And I'd done a couple 50Ks that year, but I just was coming off of training for Ironman, so 30 miles wasn't much more than 26, so it's kind of just normal. But then I just had a wild hair one day and decided like a week after I wanted to go run 100 miles, and I did. And that's the only 100 miler I have done before Moab. So, I mean, I've stayed in shape. I constantly work out. I've always been, I've never let my strength training fall behind. So I lift weights anywhere from 3 to 6 days a week. And really, since I started training for the half marathon stuff, I've always at least put in, 45 to 60 miles a week. Not really paying attention to pace, but it was really just kind of more for fun and staying in shape. And if I wanted to do a race, I could just kind of prepare for it. And then I've always wanted to do Moab for some reason. I've been in love with Moab for forever. It's one of my favorite towns, one of my favorite places. Just the scenery, the terrain, all the stuff to do. And I remember reading about Moab when I was in college, the Moab 240 specifically. And I think it was at this point, I think I heard about a podcast maybe through David Goggins and Joe Rogan, or it could have been Courtney Dahlwater maybe. And Joe Rogan is where I heard from. I think when she broke the record.
Mm.
That is insane that people can do that. And I used to tell stories about it. And then I put my name in and it got picked and I called you and the rest is history for that.
Right on. A few questions on some of the things you said. When you do strength training, can you give us an idea of what that looks like for you? What type of stuff do you do?
Yeah, so historically, coming from my background, a lot of it was Olympic lifts originally. Since I have graduated college and been out of college now for 9 years, I've really changed over my workout and my strength training completely due to the fact that I am doing a lot more endurance stuff and my joints and whatnot have already taken a pretty hard beating from 15 years of football. So I've switched over to doing more high rep, lightweight, minimal rest type stuff. So almost kind of like a hit type of thing,
Hmm.
but not as fast pace. So I do a lot of things kind of intertwined with, I do push pull, full body, and then one leg day kind of a week, roughly is what I try to do. Um, so basically what that looks like is like one day I'll do, like say Monday, I'll do a strict push, like a strict push upper body, and even with lower body as well. So on those push days, it could be something like a light squat or a kettlebell hold squat, stuff like that. And then like, a light dumbbell bench press. I kind of stay away from a barbell, to be honest. I just don't think there's much need for that in terms of what my body needs. So I do a lot of stuff with kettlebells, dumbbells, and a lot of band, like eccentric work. Um, but my days look like I pretty much do on these days, I'll do 6 exercises, usually 3 sets at each 6 exercise with about 45 seconds to a minute and a half of rest, which is where my workouts differ from a lot of people's, which is also a time thing because I don't have the time to spend 2 hours in the gym like some people might want to, especially
Hmm.
with the endurance training. So I spend a lot of time doing those workouts with anywhere from 35 to 45 minutes, and that way I can get out. And I also, after every exercise I do in between sets, I do a core exercise or an ab exercise. I do that 3 times a week with and kind of intertwined as like a superset.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't really lift anything above 75-pound dumbbells. And granted, when I came out of college, I was 215 pounds because I was used to running football and getting beaten up all the time.
Hmm.
I'm now 175 pounds, which I was 100 and I think 186 when we started training for Moab. So I've lost a pretty substantial amount of weight. But to me, the functionality and mobility is way more important than being muscular at this point, and feeling good. And I've learned that if I lift super heavy, low rep, my body just doesn't feel good, especially when I'm doing any type of endurance type activity. So like if I'm putting in 60 to 70 miles a week, which isn't uncommon, especially for the last training block, it doesn't make sense for me to go in and squat like 200, 300 pounds, So I've pretty much changed my strength training based around how I feel and what I think is necessary for me to kind of be more productive at what I'm training for, which in this case is endurance. That might change in the future, but as of right now, I just don't see the purpose of lifting heavy.
Yeah, right on. Perfect.
And it
Thank
changes for everybody, right? So like
you.
everybody's different, but for me, I just spent so many years lifting
Yeah.
heavy. I just had enough of it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other question there was about the 100 miler. Now, we hear of like these people that do couched marathon, and now it's not unheard of to do couched 100 miler. You're not the first
Unfortunately, it's
person.
not. I
Yeah.
don't suggest doing it.
Um, Tell us what came away from that experience. What did you learn from that experience aside from 100 miles is a really long way?
Yeah, so I came into it obviously knowing about nutrition and stuff from my Ironmans, but I was kind of ignorant about nutrition at that point in that 100 miler, and that started to show significantly after about mile 40. Um, and what I didn't realize either is how significant of a difference poles can make in that type of distance. And then the like sleep deprivation and the night running, I didn't have much experience with. So that kind of threw me for a loop as well. But the thing I took most out of that 100 miler and kind of coming off the couch is that preparation is necessary, not just for like performance, but more so to like train your feet to be able to handle the impact of such a long distance and such a long time running. And this is the crazy thing about Moab too, even compared to this 100 miler. Coming off of Moab, my feet were in way better condition than the 100 that I did, which is kind of crazy because like I remember my feet coming off of that 100 miler was completely swollen. I couldn't put on any shoes for almost a week and a half. And I could hardly even walk after the 100 miler. So that's kind of like the main thing. But really, the key things I took away from that are how important nutrition is, and then kind of how important it is to like break down races in sections because I didn't really break down that race in like segments mentally. And it kind of caused a mental breakdown after like 50-ish miles. And I learned that, if you're capable of kind of breaking those longer races down into segments and kind of, I guess, like checkpoints mentally where you're like, okay, I did this and now it's this next. I think that can carry you a lot further than you think
Hmm.
mentally. So yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where I learned a lot. I mean, because I honestly came in and I didn't have a bladder for my pack. I didn't have like really nutrition other than what they had at the aid station. So it was kind of just like one of those things. It's like ultimately it was disaster. If you were like a pretty like experienced ultra runner, you'd probably look at me and be like, this guy's a disaster. But I did learn a lot from that, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the process, and that one was a 7 mile loop, so it was just like a continuous loop.
Mhm.
Um, and that's obviously different than like a point to point. So you kind of get to see that aid station a little, earlier than some races. But yeah, it was kind of a learning experience, and I did take a lot from that race and put it in my training, and kind of was aware of what affected me last time, and kind of took that and knowledge and put it towards the Moab 240, even though it's a completely different race. But I was worried, like I said, I was worried about nutrition. I was worried about my feet for this
Mhm.
240 just because, last time I went, it wasn't ideal. But I think that's what, having a coach can do for you as well, just because you like to do this stuff and you think, you've spent your whole life running or working out, there's people out there who can help you in more ways than one, who've done more than you. And that's kind of the case in this scenario.
Right on. Yeah. Well, um, you appreciate certainly you coming, and asking to share this journey with you because it was blast because
Yeah.
you came from, as you said, an Ironman background. So, training is going to be very different, obviously, especially for a 240-mile race.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, why don't you give us some highlights about training because it was so different. We can't like I don't
Yeah.
want to compare the two. I just want you to kind of give us some highlights of some things that you liked within the training cycle, some things that gave you some maybe some confidence going into 240, and maybe some things that like you're like, in the future I might want to try this instead,
Right.
if you have any of that.
Yeah, I think I think this is the case for most people too who are kind of unfamiliar with this space, but I think like most people have the idea that you should run off a pace. Through Ironmans and stuff, that's the case on certain days you want to run through pace, but there's, your heart rate is also important. In this scenario, in this training block, we did everything off a heart rate, which me personally, I find very helpful and I like because it gives me a range and and I can go, okay, this is the range that I need to be in. And then it automatically goes into my watch and it keeps me in that range, throughout the whole time and kind of gives me an idea of where I need to be, which I really enjoy. And not only that, that throughout that process, you kind of get to see your heart rate drop, kind of throughout the time when you're in certain scenarios where when you first started, it might have been crazy high, and then like 5 months later, now you're doing the same thing and it's a little lower. That's kind of nice to see. And it gives you some confidence kind of moving forward when you see those big climbs ahead of you on a race map or something like that. You're like, okay, I know that my heart rate can sustain this and I can stay here and be better off later in the race. So that kind of builds some confidence. Um, for me, like structure wise, the training is really nice as well because you can plan like a week at a time, what you need to do and when you need to train. And someone who has which most case scenarios, everyone has a full-time job, that's really nice. So you can kind of plan when you want to do things and how you want to do them. And then I really enjoyed throughout the training block as well, like kind of recreating the race in terms of the elevation, like per mile, throughout that. So that was really helpful as well. But it's kind of completely different from something like an Ironman, right? Training from an Ironman
Hmm.
because yes, Ironmans typically, people want to get them done like ultrathons. Like I want to get to the finish line. That's the key. But it tends, from what I've noticed, it tends to be more competitive in terms of time, Ironmans. So your training is a little more fast paced and a little like more kind of like this all the time.
Yes.
A lot of my runs were like, fast paced, coming like brick workouts, coming straight off the bike, and kind of maintaining a higher heart rate to pretty much prepare me for that.
Hmm.
And I kind of like just comparatively, I've really enjoyed just like getting in the woods and just running, and it's like, okay, I can keep my heart rate here and I can take my time. And like, that's for me has been really enjoyable.
Hmm.
And it's kind of gave me a different perspective on the like running, like my running life in general, because I used to think that like it was all about pace and being fast. And like, it's really quite the opposite, because more times than none, like you're not competing for, at least in my case, I'm not competing for like a first place, position, maybe one day. But for me, it's more so like getting the goal done and enjoying it while you do it. So that was been, that structure has been really nice for me, just being able to get in the woods. I have this workout and I'm not set on, anything in particular other than keeping my heart rate right and running for 4 hours.
Hmm.
Um, and getting the elevation that I need. And that's been quite nice, especially compared to the Ironman training that I was doing because I did all of the Ironman training by myself, had no coach, had really no experience with it. I learned everything offline, and my training was pretty intense and kind of based off the pace. So like all my stuff, all my swimming, all my biking, and all my running was typically off of pace. I mean, I think when you asked me if I had a heart rate monitor, I was like, oh no, I don't have one. But yeah, so those are things that I've really enjoyed. I mean, I think competitive wise, like if you're a competitive person, I think every once in a while it'd be kind of nice to have a little bit of pace running, but in this scenario for what we were doing specifically, it wasn't needed and it wouldn't be sufficient to the training. And like kind of sufficient to Moab because like you said, it's a lot of power walking and a lot of power hiking throughout those 240 miles.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I brought up Ellis's training peaks so we could kind of peruse through it because a lot of people think that you have to do so much volume, for 200 plus miler.
Yeah.
But as you said, you're a working man. You got a full-time job. You're about to get married. There's other things in life. So as
Yeah.
we kind of go through here, I mean, just looking through the maximum volume phase, we had that 100K, which ended up being I think about 50 miles, right? You did about
Yeah.
50, is that
50 or
right?
53 or something.
Yeah.
And I must say, like, that's one thing I actually really appreciate about you and the way that you set up these type of things, training for these 200 milers is like, especially in today's society, right? You have, I think we touched on it a little bit, but like you have, if you're on social media and you do follow these people, you see all these people who are like, putting in these 100-mile weeks, week after week after week. And next thing you know, you kind of, if you're following them, you think that's what you have to do. And it's kind of eh, really far from the truth. I think it's just really unnecessary. And I think you're putting way more stress on your body than needed. And a lot of people who are doing those 100, 120-mile weeks, they might have full-time jobs. I mean, maybe, but that's pretty tough to do if you're a working person who works, 10 hours or plus a day. So I
Right.
think the really nice thing is like it is possible to do these races and train the correct way, even with a full-time job, and that's
Yeah.
something that people should keep in mind.
And Ellis's biggest week was 20 hours if we talk in time volume, and that was with the 50 miler being 13 and a half hours.
Yeah.
So this is looking at the other weeks, the next week was a recovery week, so it was 10 hours. Then he had a 15 and a half hour week, about a 12-hour week, another 12-hour week. So, like we're not talking mega volume here for a race that was, 240 plus miles.
Yeah.
So, like I always try to stress that to people is that, you don't have to do tremendous volume if the goal is to go enjoy and run this, this race. Because Ellis, you're right. Like people see like especially what elites are doing, and they're like, oh my gosh, is that what it takes? Not necessarily.
Well, yeah, and you have
Um,
like the, shout out to him, great guy, I'm sure, but you have like the David Goggins of the world, and like,
yeah.
which he was in Moab. I ran with him for a little bit, but like looked a little painful to watch him run. But you see those guys, and like I just don't think it's necessary, and I think at some point like you're doing more harm than good. I could be wrong about that. Everybody's different, but
Yeah. Oh,
I really, and that's the thing at first too. Like when I was, to be honest, I mean, when we first started a couple months in, I'm like, I should be doing more. Like I feel like I'm not doing enough, I feel like I should do more. And like it ended up panning out and working out perfectly for me personally. And that might change. Like let's say that I want to do the Florida, the Keys 100. Well, that's a more pace thing. So we might
hmm
have to put in,
Yep.
more
Yep.
time and
Yeah.
we'll plan for that accordingly. But
Right.
this race specifically, I mean, me personally, it seemed more about getting to the finish line than about having a number
Right.
that I
Right.
wanted to finish in. Obviously, you have an idea like mentally that you would like to get to, but with it being your first go round, it's like your goal is to get to the finish line because it is 240 miles
Right.
with 32,000 feet of elevation. And everyone, obviously, if I went back and did it again, it'd probably be like, okay, well, I want to go for 85, 90 hours. And if that's the case, then, the training may change. Um, but in terms of this training block, I thought everything kind of went really well and really smoothly. And honestly, my recovery was the most surprising thing. Like my legs were completely fine. A
Good.
little bit of foot pain a couple days after, but my legs, for the most part, completely fine. I went on a 4 mile hike the day after. Um, and I think that shows like how good the training was. I think there's a lot to be said about training for something, but then also how you recover says a lot
Yeah.
about the training as well.
And you said it very succinctly, it just depends on what the goal is. And
Yeah.
we were on the same page as to what your goal was. And, if there is a different goal, then yeah, training does change based on the goal. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I appreciate all of that. With all of that said, what were some of your pre-race expectations? Like, what were some of the thoughts you had going into this event that, what did you think about the distance? What were some things that like maybe you read about that were like playing on your mind?
Yeah, so obviously the 240 miles is a pretty daunting distance,
Absolutely.
especially coming from a guy who's only ran 100 and it's been a loop form 100. And then, thankfully I had some time to go out there and run, I think in June or something. So I had a little bit of idea of what it was going to look like. But I was predominantly worried about how I was going to deal with the terrain in terms of the elevation and the rockiness of the course. I was worried about my feet. And then I was also worried about my sleep. So I was a little concerned about how my body was going to deal with the minimal amount of sleep that I was going to get. And then I was also extremely concerned about my nutrition and how my body was going to handle just smacking gels for, 100 straight hours. Um, and then obviously the distance internally like was kind of on my mind constantly. And I was trying to figure out, I went into the race saying, okay, all that matters to me is the next aid station. So I'm just going to break down the race by each aid station, which is what I did. And it worked out very well for me mentally. Um, once the race day got closer and we got to Moab and I was watching I was watching the weather, then my mindset kind of started scrambling. Um, because I don't like the rain. I don't think necessarily anybody likes running in the rain. And they're talking, record rains in 2 days. And
Right.
I was kind of a mental mess for those, day or two before the race. And I was like, okay, well, like I'm gonna have to change my game plan. What about shoes and socks? So I think I originally planned on changing socks like 4 or 5 times. I changed socks 12 times.
No.
So I ended up having more drop bags. And then obviously, they dropped the first crew available aid station, which is at mile like 74 at Indian Creek. They dropped that like 4 or 5 days before the race. And then they dropped another one, which was Monticello Lake or Shea Mountain. So they made you pick one of those. I got Shea Mountain. So that was kind of a big hit to the morale as well. So I was trying to mentally get right for that, thinking, how am I supposed to go 114 miles without seeing my crew?
Right.
Because if you haven't done these races or you have, the thing to know is I think everybody looks forward to seeing their crew at some point. It's like
Hmm.
a pretty big like morale booster. So, mile 74 or 76 or whatever it was at Indian Creek is a huge difference compared to mile 114. So
For
you're
sure.
practically running, a 100 miler with no crew. So I had to change my plan based off of that. So I ended up having like 5 dropbacks compared to the original two that I were going to have, and like you told me, it's always better to have that stuff there than to not have it there. So mentally I had to kind of tackle that. But those were like the main things. So like, nutrition,
Yep.
breaking down the race,
Yep.
my feet holding up, we had a pretty in-depth conversation about that as well. Which I actually started the race and didn't tape my feet. And then at mile 30, I ended up taping my feet and I pretty much retaped them almost at every major aid station. And it ended up kind of being correct about my feet. My feet like didn't have any blisters or anything, but they just weren't holding up well. Like they just hurt. They almost like after mile 50, they just hurt. So I kind of had to figure out, what the answer was to that. But yeah, going into the race, there's just so much that goes on mentally, before taking on 240 miles because it is going to be such a long process, and there's so many ups and so many downs throughout the whole thing. But my main thing was really wanting to kind of lock in mentally and being able to break down the race segment by segment by segment. Because it doesn't seem so daunting if you just have a 15-mile section compared to 200 miles.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and we did have that the week of the race conversation because that was a huge change to hand down, just a few days prior to race start.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's really tough, and you dealt with it extremely well. Um, and some of the things that you brought up are definitely things that I want to go a little bit further into detail on. You mentioned the feet and that you did 12 sock changes and
Yeah.
taping every main aid station, which was great.
Yeah.
What shoes did you go with? Because you had talked about the Solomons, right?
Yeah. So I ended up bringing 5 shoes with me total. 3 of them were the Speedland GSs.
Hmm.
I started the race in those. And then I ran the first 17 miles in those. And then the next section is known for being a little sandy. So I switched to the Salomon Ultra Dust Lights, which is kind of basically a gator in the shoe,
Hmm.
the zip up. In terms of keeping things out of my shoes in the sand, phenomenal. But they didn't mesh well with my wet feet.
Mm.
And I think that was the start of my feet problems,
Hmm.
specifically like on the callus sides of the outside of my heels. I think it was predominantly those shoes. And I put maybe 30 miles. I think I did a 30 to 30 miler, a 50K in those shoes on one of our training sessions. So I felt pretty confident in them and I didn't have any problems, but it was also dry. So I ended up running 60 miles in those because I didn't have any shoes. Because on top of that, for those who don't know, you can't, in between Amasa back, which is at mile 16, and that's the first crew station where your crew can see you. I switched shoes there, but since they took out even though at Indian Creek you're originally supposed to be able to see your crew, you don't have any, you can't have any drop bags in between mile 16 and 75, which is also a significant distance with no drop bag.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much stuck in those shoes, even though they were giving me problems. And what I learned from those shoes, I think anyone who's thinking about buying those, I think those are more so of like your multi-day stage events for like strictly, sand, like desert, Sahara desert
Marathon
sand.
to sub. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's what
exactly.
they were
Marathon
designed for.
assault. Yeah, those type of things, like in Morocco or in
Right.
Jordan, like those type of. I
Yeah.
would not suggest wearing them on something as rocky and up and down as Moab.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's just the S Lab shoe with a gator, though.
Hmm. Yeah,
But for me, they didn't work in that scenario. I don't think. And
that's fair.
then I ended up switching back to the GS Speedlin, and I wore that for another 50 miles. And then I ended up switching to around at Shea Mountain, which is a mile 114. I switched to my Nike Zegmas.
Hmm.
And out of all the shoes I wore, those did the best and treated my feet the best as well.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I had to switch out of them. I think at mile like I think at 170 or 180, I had to switch out of them because they were soaking wet. Then I switched back and finished pretty much the entire race in the Speedlands. Mhm.
Did you
And the
have
Speedlands
any?
were great as well, but I just, I messed up originally and I thought that a half size bigger was going to be enough for my swollen feet. It was not.
Mm.
Luckily, my brother was done running with me, so I ended up stealing his size 11, which I wear size 9.5. So I was wearing size and a half bigger. Pretty much finished the last 50 miles of the race.
Did you have a gator with either the Zagama or the GS?
No, so I actually decided to go with no gator,
Okay.
and I had no problems.
Probably
And
because it was so wet.
really, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Predominantly, the reason I chose not to is because the ground was wet,
Mm.
and I think in most cases, you're talking about the Utah desert, it's going to be dry. So, like, if someone goes and does it next year, by all means, probably bring a gator with you. Um, but the scenario was that it was wet almost the
Mm.
entire time. So it wasn't dusty, and there wasn't much, loose sand coming up in my feet.
Okay. Um, just staying on the gear topic here for a moment. Obviously you had some extremely long stretches that you were not going to have drop bags or crew access.
Right.
What pack did you use, and what did that pack look like for those longer segments?
Yeah, so I took off with the Salomon 15 liter. And that 15 liter looks significantly different than that 12 liter.
Hmm.
It's got a roll bag on it, so to basically keep things dry, which is the main reason I chose to take off with that one. And it's got, 2.5 liter. I think you can fit like a 3 liter bladder in there if you want it. And then it's got your two your two soft flasks in the front, kind of similar to the 12 liter. But I took off with that, packed pretty heavy. I think it weighed 16 pounds when I took off.
Woo.
Yeah. So in this case, you obviously have your mandatory gear. Um,
What did that look like, by the way?
yeah, so that's basically you have 500 calories of you have to have 500 emergency calories to keep on you at all time, emergency bivy, headlamp, an extra battery, a hat, or like a buff to cover things up. You have to have some type of pants or leggings that cover the entire leg, and then a jacket with a hood, and then obviously your tracking device and your GPS. And there's probably a couple other things I'm forgetting about. But the biggest thing for me out of all those mandatory gear was with the rain is like, okay, how am I gonna do I take waterproof rain pants and a waterproof rain jacket, or do I take a puffer and leggings? So
Hmm.
that was where I really battled, at the start of the race, and it wasn't raining at the start of the race, so I ended up leaving behind all my rain gear and bringing, because to me it was like I don't want to be cold, and if I get out there at nighttime and and it's not raining, I need to have my puffer jacket because I don't deal with the cold well. So I ended up taking those, and of course, at mile 30, it started pouring rain. So the first whole 12 hours of the night, I was stuck in the rain and
Ugh.
pretty much running in the rain with a plastic poncho. Um, But yeah, so that bag is what I took. And then I carried the original plan, I think, was to carry enough nutrition, about 60 carbs, 60 to 70 carbs an hour
Okay,
is what we're looking at. When you're doing a 20-mile section, that's a lot of gels and food.
for sure.
Um, so considering that it wasn't as hot, I made the personal decision after about mile 30 to dial it back to like 40 grams of carbs an hour. And the reason I did that was because I felt pretty good. And also I had gels that were 40, the Huma gels that are 40 grams of carbs per.
Hmm.
And I was like, it's just easier for me to knock one of these down every hour. And it's less room in my pack because my pack was getting pretty heavy, especially with that 2.5 liter bladder. And I also started playing with that as well, like filling it halfway up, which is also something we talked about before I went in. Um, but I ended up having an issue at mile 16 where my bladder actually had a significant leak in it. So I ended up running like 80 plus miles with a leaking bladder. And then I texted my crew and they replaced it at mile 114.
Gotcha.
Um, but yeah, I pretty much stuck with that 15-liter bag for that distance. I think I did one section where I switched to my 12-liter just so they could repack my bag and I could get out pretty quick.
Hmm.
But I went in with those two bags, and that 15-liter for the conditions in the rain just seemed to be a better option to keep my stuff dry. Because that 12-liter is kind of just like mesh, and it doesn't really
Right.
do a good job of keeping anything dry.
Correct. Yeah. If I use that the Advanced Skin 12, then I put everything in Ziploc bags. That way, like I know
Yeah,
they've got a
which is
barrier.
what I did as well.
Hmm.
But the only thing I didn't like, originally, that I can't remember what the exact name of the 15-liter is. Um,
It's probably just the Advanced Skin 15,
It
but
might
yeah.
be the Advanced Skin 15. But the thing that, it doesn't have that's kind of inconvenient is it doesn't have, for those who are looking into it, it doesn't have your two clips for your quiver.
Mm.
So you're kind of locked in to either doing, on the back of the pack. But what I did is I had before I went out there, I just had a seamstress just put those on there for me. And it ended up working out fine. But I guess the original reason they do that is because it has that, bag up top that you want to
Right.
open, trying to,
Yes.
allow it to be accessible.
Right.
But
Gotcha.
it worked out fine. The two loops that I got put in did fine. So
Little tip for the future. You can always wrap a little bit of duct tape around your poles towards the top, and that way, like if something happens with your bladder, you can unwrap that duct tape and use that on, for whatever purpose you need. But
okay, yeah, that's
yeah,
a good one.
little side tip there.
Yeah, because I was like, my back was just getting soaking wet, and I'm like, I know I'm not sweating that much. So like, what's going on? And I just undid, and I was like, oh, great,
Yeah.
awesome.
Duct tape's great, but yeah, you just got to figure out where you can put it. And usually, if you just wrap it, a good bit about around your pole, it will do it.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen again that way, but
Hopefully not. Yeah, but
I might start doing
yeah,
that.
it's always good to have a little bit of duct tape. But
Yeah, all right.
yeah. And speaking of poles, what did you decide to go with? What did you use?
I use you might be able to help me with the name, the
The
Lecky
Lecky?
rolls.
Yeah,
Yeah. The ones that have your
the
the
sharp grip, the
connectors.
sharp grip.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I originally like used I think when I first started training, I was using the Black Diamond, the
the Z
carbon
poles.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I switched those Leckies. It's a significant difference. So for anyone who doesn't think there's a difference, it's probably worth money to make a change.
Yeah,
Um,
they are. And how did your hands do? Like, especially with all the rain.
my hands actually held up surprisingly well.
Good.
I did put some tape on my hands, and I
Hmm.
also used the salty britches on my hands as well.
Nice.
But I pretty much didn't take those. I didn't take those straps off the entire time, I don't think. So,
Right on. Yeah.
but I know some people have some serious issues with their hands, especially over that distance.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too about the Lecky, which a lot of people don't realize, is that if you go onto the accessories page on Lecky, they actually have like half gloves that you can get that still have the shark grip.
Hmm.
So like if anybody has problems with the Velcro that comes with the poles, they do
Yeah,
have half gloves, and they actually have winter gloves too.
I didn't know
Um,
that.
yeah, so but that's on their accessories
Well, and I
page.
mean, I spent a lot of time with gloves on as well, so I ended up having my gloves on and then the strap. So like that
Yeah,
probably was a
yeah,
little bit of a reason my hands held up fairly
yeah,
decent.
yep. Yeah, I did the same thing at tour. I put my waterproof gloves on and then I'd throw the,
So,
the
yeah,
half glove over. Um, so very good. Um, the you did a really good job just touching on nutrition once again. Practicing in training with nutrition. Why don't you talk to people about what that looked like in your training? How often, what were you doing during training with nutrition?
yeah, for sure. I think this was something that was new to me as well. Like, just as important as the actual running itself is for training for one of these super long ultrathons, I think it's just as important to train your gut as well, which is something I was kind of ignorant about before we started this whole process. Um, and I mean, because you got to think like if your stomach can't handle what you're trying to put down at the race and you're just throwing everything up, like you're pretty much doomed from there. So what we did is obviously you have notes every day of like, this is the amount of water, this is the amount of, carb intake you should be having. I pretty much just got in the habit of if I didn't run with my vest, I pretty much ran with a belt and I kept what I was going to eat for the race day or what I was estimating that I was going to eat for the race day. I just had it in my pack and I pretty much went almost, and I didn't really slide on this. I stayed pretty strict to this every run, no matter the run, is I pretty much ate the gels that I was going to eat during the race almost every hour, or no, literally every hour. Even if it was just an hour run, I would take it with me. If I didn't need it, obviously there's some runs where you're like, I don't need it, but that's not the point. The point was to train my gut to be able to handle those gels in every instance. So that's what I did. So through training, if it was a 3 hour run, I would have 122, like 280 grams of carbs with me, and I would be putting those down every hour. Um, yeah, and I mean that's kind of what I want. I wanted to make sure that my gut was used to putting down, 2 gels an hour for so many hours, and
Hmm.
I think it paid off because I had zero stomach problems
Awesome.
throughout the entire race. And I think a lot of people have stomach problems throughout those races, whether they're throwing up or whether their bowel movement's not normal.
Yep.
It might be too much information, but like my bowel movements were completely normal. I had no problems whatsoever. I stayed on schedule and I mean, just really perfect to be honest.
Perfect.
Which I had a lot of practice with those gels. So I
Yeah.
think that's probably the reason
Awesome.
why.
You mentioned Huma. Was there anything else that you used?
Yeah, so I use the Stinger waffles as well.
Hmm.
I use Stinger waffles, Humas, and some Cliff Bars as well. Those are predominantly what I used in between segments.
Hmm.
And then my food of choice at most of the aid stations was just a cheese quesadilla and a breakfast burrito. I don't think I'll ever eat a breakfast burrito again after that race, but
That's fair. That's fair.
and then there was a couple segments where that were crew accessible where they brought me some food. I didn't love putting it down, but I knew it was necessary.
Hmm.
Um, and then I did try those Never Second gels just because that's who they're sponsored by.
Hmm.
They didn't upset my stomach, but I really disliked the taste. But in some dire situations, I had to have them. So I just would grab a couple and put them in my pack for emergencies. And they saved me a couple times, but I wasn't the biggest fan of them.
Fair. Um, did you try putting the Huma on the waffles?
No, but that's a good one. I should have done that.
Yeah, definitely. Next time.
Yeah, I might just try that on my next run.
Yeah, it's delicious.
And I
Um,
mean, the humans, and the reason I went with those is just because like the texture of them,
mhm,
that doesn't really get old to me.
mhm.
It's more of like for those who don't know, it's kind of like an applesauce
Yep.
texture a little bit. It's a more like fruity.
Little grit to them with the chia seed, but no, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And just like the regular gels of just like that sticky consistency, it just kind of gets old to me. So
Mhm.
that's why I decided to go with the humus.
Right on. Yeah, no, Huma and waffles. It's delicious.
That's the move. It's
Um,
like peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
exactly. Um, and then for hydration, what were you using for electrolytes?
Yeah, so I used both the noons and then the elements.
Okay.
Um, Predominantly the noons because I could just in my bag right here, I just put one of the whole tubes right here and keep it on me.
He's pointing to his shoulder for those that you can't see.
Yeah, for those who can't see, I'm on my shoulder. Um, because then I can just pop the cap on those when I'm at the aid station, drop it in. But I did keep elements on me, and what I actually ended up doing is I kept a one noon filled bladder, or not bladder, but a soft flask in one of my left side,
Hmm.
and then I kept a element in my right side, and
Hmm.
then I would just take like sips out of that and be conscious of like pretty much my sodium intake out of that because the noons I think are 300, the elements are 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And then I leave my bladder with just normal water. So I do the majority of my drinking out of my bladder and then just take small sips out of my soft flask to kind of get that sodium consumption that I was looking for,
Hmm.
which worked out for me. And I kind of trained that way as well. So I trained with both noons and elements the whole training block. The elements are a little more intense in terms of sodium. And for those who don't know, or you can over sodium yourself in these races, and it can just be almost as detrimental to you as not taking enough sodium. So I wanted to be careful about that as well. But those
Right on.
noons seem to be my favorite.
Right on. Um, Excellent. All right. Anything else on nutrition and hydration that you can think of?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, it's one of those things where your hydration just changes based off of the heat and based on how much you're putting out, in this
Yeah.
case, in this rare case in the desert, it just wasn't hot, it was just
Yeah.
pretty cold and wet. So like I just wasn't sweating as much as I planned to.
Yeah. Okay.
So my
Um, Perfect.
electrolytes were not as high as they would have been otherwise.
Okay. Um, all right. So the only other gear thing, and if you have something else that you want to mention, please do, but would be your lighting. What were you using for lighting?
Yeah, so I used the Phoenix headlamp,
Okay.
and that's the actual model. I'm trying to.
Don't worry about that. That's too crazy.
There's so many models, but it's the one with
Yeah.
just it's the one with the boa on it as well.
Okay.
I carried three batteries with me at all times. It did die one night, so that was ended up being necessary. That one specifically has like four different, it actually has six different modes. So you have like the amber light and then the LED light, so you can switch back and forth. I ran it on low pretty much the entire time until I got to Shea Mountain where it was just pouring rain and super cold and foggy. Um, but that worked out really well for me. I would suggest making sure you have enough batteries at all times because you do not want to get stuck out on those races with no light. It would be
And so you just use the Phoenix headlight.
That's all I use. Yeah. And
Okay.
I also saw a bunch of people using, waist lights and
Yes.
headlights.
Yes.
For me, it just wasn't necessary. Um,
Yeah.
Mine pretty much, and that specific Phoenix that I have, if you do turn it on the highest setting, it just burns the battery a little quicker, but it is extremely bright.
Right on. Cool.
But I did go back and forth about getting a waist lamp, but
I'll try to
uh,
find which model that is, and I'll put it in the show notes so people can check it out.
yeah,
Because like I said, the models are so crazy. But I'll look that up and put it in the show notes.
yeah,
Um, Perfect. Okay. Anything else gear-wise that you want to mention? Anything that worked well or we haven't discussed?
yeah. I would. This is more so on the foot side, but socks. I
Mm.
mean, I'm sure people already use them, but the Injinji, toe socks
And
seem
which
to.
ones did you use for this?
I use the Ultra ones, so
Hmm.
I think they're the Ultra Trail ones.
Hmm.
I use those throughout the entire race, which is actually a pretty hefty build to front 15 of those.
Yes. Yes.
But I use those paired with that salty britches in between my toes. And I had no blisters. So
Awesome.
for those looking for a good sock combination, those are pretty solid.
Which height did you go with?
I went with the mid calf height. So
Ah, so not the
yeah,
cruise.
nope, not the cruise. Um,
I
but
like
they're
I'm the old man sock guy. I like the cruise.
yeah, yeah, well, I don't blame you though. But yeah, they're so solid, man. I mean,
They
I
are
had no blistering. I've worn them all training and had no blistering whatsoever.
fantastic. That's
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, cool. Um, Moving on. So everybody always asks about sleep. The way I'd like to cover that aspect of this is perhaps you run us through, you've segmented this race, aid station, and if you want to say, hey, not much happened between this, but why don't you run us through the race, your segment to wherever you took it. And then interjecting in there, like when you took sleep breaks, if it was like during, if you took a dirt nap, you can mention that, but like kind of talk about how that went for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So my original goal was let's go to Shea Mountain, which is mile 114. In this specific scenario, was where I got to first see my crew.
Hmm.
So I actually ended up going 114 miles with no sleep.
Okay.
Um,
And
so
how much time did that take just to give people reference?
that was about, it took me just about 36 hours to get to Shea Mountain, maybe a little
Okay.
more.
Great.
Um, and I wanted, actually, let me rephrase this too. I took a 2-minute dirt nap right before I climbed Shea Mountain. So
Okay.
I stopped. I stopped and was like hallucinating pretty severely
Okay.
at mile like 100. And I was like, I just need to take a quick nap. I took a quick nap.
Anything fun? Did you get to see anything fun?
Yeah, for some reason, my hallucinations this go around lasted for like almost 2 straight hours. And for some reason, we were on a pretty narrow path. And I don't know why, but it was like I was going through an old Western town. So all the trees and rocks looked like old Western, like buildings and cars. So that just pretty much went on for like 2 straight hours. And then after like the second hour of it, I was like, I gotta just maybe take like a quick 2 or 3 minute nap. Especially with Shea Mountain coming up, because Shea Mountain in this scenario was nothing but mud and clay for
Mm.
like 4 straight miles climbing. It was an absolute disaster. So that was almost probably the hardest part of the race. But
The
I
polls
went with
really
no
helped then.
sleep. What's that?
The polls really helped there.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you literally couldn't step without sliding.
Mm.
So the poles in that scenario were almost necessary. If you didn't have them, you would have been on all fours climbing up the
Oh
hill.
gosh.
Yeah, it was, and then it was like the type of clay that just sticks to your feet.
Mhm.
So your feet were like 10 pounds compared to just your normal feet. It's terrible. But yeah, getting back to the sleep, I pretty much went 114 miles with no sleep,
And
and
no pacer, right? Up to this point.
I got a pacer at mile 75.
Oh, you did. Okay.
75 to 114, I got to pick up a pacer, and he actually ran roughly 45 miles with me to get me to Shea Mountain.
Cool.
Um, yeah, and then funny story, I was about a mile away from the aid station at Shea Mountain, mile 114, and I see a van stuck about a mile away from the aid station,
Right.
and that that van ended up being my crew.
Oh no.
So, so instead of getting to sleep in that nice bed that I rented the van for, I ended up sleeping in the back of a pickup truck for my nap. That was pretty brutal on the morale after being up for 36 hours.
Oh my goodness. Um,
Um,
well, and going back to picking up the pacer, pacers mean different things and serve different functions. Anything that you would note that like you liked your pacers to do or not do? Did you communicate with them? Anything you wanted or not wanted?
yeah, so I made like a whole PowerPoint for everybody, and each slide was kind of presented at each person's position during the race, and the one thing that I wanted from my crew members was to be positive, no negativity, in terms of like when I mention negativity, like, no, like, oh, you look rough, like, maybe you need to drop, like nothing like that. Let's stay away from those things. It's all positivity. And then I also asked them to be like every, 30 minutes, hey, have you eaten? Have you
Mm,
drinking? You need to eat, you need to drink, because, there is a point in the race where you're just like so over it,
yeah.
you just forget about it. And then I asked them to kind of like, instead of staying behind me, to stay in front of me. I'm more of a guy who like, I like to see people in front of me, so because it kind of keeps me up with them. Um, so they all did a pretty good job of that. But the two main things were like positivity and then food and water, because I knew at certain points in the race I was just going to be so burnt out that I was going to probably forget to eat and drink. So keeping me on top of my nutrition was one of the biggest and most important things for me. And then, you know, kind of like telling me, hey, look, we have this amount of miles left until the aid station. Like, keep going, keep going. So that kind of refers back to that positivity thing. But everyone's different. But I can tell you one thing: the Pacers make a huge difference in those.
And how did you pick yours?
Well, it's actually kind of hard to find people who want to go run, 50 plus miles with you in the desert. But one of my best friends has spent a lot of time running with me throughout the training. So he was kind of a no-brainer, and it was something that he really wanted to do personally. And he ended up doing 80 miles with me. So he ended up getting a good chunk of change in mile
Wow.
wise.
Yeah.
My brother typically, stays in really good shape and always is up for doing stuff with me like this. So that was kind of a simple one as well. And then I was originally just going to have two pacers, and I was looking for more, but everybody was busy. And I actually shared the first 30 miles I shared with one person. So it was practically like having a pacer anyways.
Yeah.
So we kind of just like, which tends to happen on these races, I think. You just kind of pair with somebody for a little while and you share 5, 15, 20 miles with them, which happened on the first half of the race. But I originally had two pacers, and then my mom felt like she could come in and do a segment with me later on,
Nice.
which she did, and that was really special to me, and that was really
Oh,
cool. So she did Monticello Lake to the Needles with me, I think, and that's like 14 miles with 2,800 feet of elevation. So she did
solid.
really good.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So that's kind of, family and friends.
Hmm.
That's pretty much how I went about doing that. I think on
Yeah.
the next one though, if I did do like another longer race like this, I would probably try to get, maybe a couple more people who are more experienced in terms of the distance. Because for those who don't know, like if your pacer can't keep up with you in a section, you're stuck with them.
Yeah.
You can't drop them. And actually, ran with a guy for a little while who dropped his pacer and didn't know that rule. And I tried to tell him, and then he got 4 miles from his pacer and realized, and then had to go back 4 miles to pick
Oh
his pacer.
man.
Yeah. Because, there was an incident where my brother was in pretty rough shape because he'd done 50 miles and he was struggling the last 2 miles. And it held me up probably a good hour and a
Mm.
half. And I made the personal decision at mile 200 to do the last 40 alone, which was probably the right decision. So everyone's different, but I just felt like if someone went with me out of my pacers that I was going to be slowed down, which is kind of hard to believe when you're at mile 200.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I think actually like the last 40 miles of my race were actually some of the more fast-paced miles actually from the whole race. But pacers are really about like who makes you feel comfortable and who are you close with, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
you don't want to be stuck out there with someone who's not a god, like doesn't have a good positive mindset for,
For
you
sure.
know, 15 straight hours.
Yep. Absolutely. And sorry to sidetrack us, but anybody else that like came onto the crew that wasn't a part of the pacing?
No, not that I know of. No, it's pretty much my crew was pretty much my fiance, and then the pacers that I mentioned, and
Okay.
then I had a, physical therapist friend who brought his fiance with him as well. So I had a crew of like 5 people, and then like 3 pacers.
Right on. And who was your
Um,
crew chief?
my fiance.
Yeah. And it was this her first experience with something like this?
Yeah, so it was her first experience. She like went and helped a little bit with me on that, 100 miler that I did, but
Uh-huh.
she just pretty much stayed there. But yeah, this was her first experience, and I think she was a nervous wreck.
Well, you're still engaged, so that's
Yes, we are. Yeah, she did a phenomenal job, though. I mean, she was at every aid station when she needed to be. She had everything ready, I mean, for the first time, she just did such a good job. So I was super thankful for that because that matters as well.
yes.
Showing up to a aid station when you've just ran, 20 plus miles and it's freezing outside, like you want to get there and make sure everything's like there for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Well, kudos to her. What's her name?
Natalie.
All right, Natalie. Well,
Yeah.
it's a big, shout out to Natalie because that's awesome. It's tough. Um, we talked about making sure that your crew takes care of themselves, because
Oh yeah.
oftentimes they can forget because I mean, obviously Natalie was a nervous wreck because she wanted to do her best for you and keep you moving, but
Yeah.
oftentimes because of that, they forget about themselves. So that's awesome. Okay, so you've got us to mile 114. Is that where we're at? Shea
Yeah,
Mountain?
we're at mile 114.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So you lay down about how long did you get to sleep for?
So I slept there for honestly only an hour and a half.
Okay.
So I
Was it
slept
tough to
around.
sleep or no?
Yeah, because of the incident with the stuck van, it shook me up a little bit mentally and had me pretty pissed off, to be honest. So it did take me a little while to fall asleep. I didn't sleep well whatsoever, but I did sleep on and off for an hour and a half. And then I spent about an hour getting my feet taped and kind of getting my feet taped, eating, drinking some coffee, getting warm. So I ended up spending almost 3.5 to 4 hours at that aid station.
Hmm.
Um, so pretty much 2 of the hours were pretty much spent just kind of taking care of myself. And then the
Yeah.
other hour and a half was sleeping on and off.
How about the van? Van make it out?
Yeah, we got the van out, and then I ended up switching after about 45 minutes in a bed of a truck, which was also very freezing cold. So I slept in a sleeping bag. I got out of that and then got and finished like an hour of sleep in the van.
Gotcha.
Some nice guy pulled out my my what a disaster it was. And it was like pouring rain, so like I understand, I
Yeah.
guess, but
Yeah. Yep.
whatever.
It happens. It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and you never want it to, but it does, you know. So,
It's part of it. You just roll with the punches.
yep, that's absolutely correct. Yep, for sure. Okay, so good downtime. Coming out of that aid station, you're at a mile 114, not quite halfway. Almost halfway.
Halfway.
How's everything feeling at this point, mentally, physically?
That is probably the out of coming out of any aid station and starting the next section, that is the best that I felt the entire race.
Okay.
Um, so I came out of there, I got my feet taped. I was worried about my feet at this point. Felt like they were thrashed, and then I ended up going to get them taped from the medic, and they're like, "Your feet look the best out of I've seen yet." And I'm like, well, they don't feel that way. Um, and then I changed shoes into those Nikes, changed my whole outfit. Was feeling just really good actually.
Yeah,
Even with only an hour and a half of sleep, felt really good and took off and felt phenomenal.
nice.
Um, Coming off of that mile 114 and kind of having that rest. But I ate a full breakfast, drank a coffee because it was morning time. It was like 7 in the morning at this point. So I was trying to stay on schedule, like mentally with what I was eating and drinking.
Right.
And I did that and I took off and I think I stayed up another 30 hours after that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Um,
in those 30 hours, anything crazy transpire? Like, where did that bring you to, and then what happened in between?
yeah. So I took off there and went to Monticello Lake. I did Monticello Lake with my mom, which is a shorter section. It's like 13 miles. And then I picked up my brother at the next aid station, and we went another 45-ish miles, I think. And then we met my crew. I can't remember what that aid station's called. It's not the Needles. It might be Dry Valley. It's Dry Valley. And I got there and I just didn't sleep. I just sat down for, probably 35 minutes and ate like a full-on noodle meal, like a pasta meal. Didn't feel the need to sleep, but it was the start of the night. It was like 8, 9 o'clock. Stayed there for like, yeah, 45 minutes and then just took off throughout the night. Nothing really crazy transpired in between then. Those are pretty moderate sections with very little elevation. So they're really just, I picked my brother for that section specifically because I heard that it was extremely boring. Um, so I wanted to have someone I could kind of converse with back and forth.
Sure.
So in between that Shea Mountain and then that 50-mile section, it was pretty much just like a mundane, like 60-mile flat section. 40 of those miles took place on a dirt road slash asphalt road, and it was just completely flat, which ended up being kind of tough because you wanted to run it, but it's just not something I felt like at the time that like I could get a good steady pace on because my feet were hurting so bad. Um, so
Gotcha.
yeah, nothing in between that really was crazy.
Okay. All
But I
right.
went that whole section. So I pretty much went another 80 miles without sleeping almost all the way to
Pretty impressive.
yeah. To mile
Okay.
two, no, not 200. It was mile 180, which would have been road 46.
Okay. All right. Something that I always talk about with my pacers, and I'm curious if this came into play for you. I tell them ahead of time, and they're all well aware of this now. I say, don't ask me how I'm doing.
Yeah.
You probably know how I'm doing.
Yeah.
Ask me what I need. Was there anything that you shared with your pacers, or anything that started to, come to the surface that you had to address with them?
Um, yeah, so like one of my facers like wanted to like keep pushing me, like pushing me like, come on, man, like we got to get it faster. And I'm like, so that kind of went on for like 30 minutes. And I finally told him, I was like, I need you to stop pushing me. I'm not, I'm right now, I'm going as fast as I possibly
Yeah.
can. Um, I'm, 160 miles in. Like
Yeah.
I get that
Yeah.
you would go faster,
Yeah.
but right now I can't.
Yeah.
And I think he was like trying to give like the positive encouragement.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that wasn't it for me at that
Right.
moment. I was
Right.
irritated and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Hmm.
And because mentally you're like, you've ran 30 miles, I've ran 160. Like, so instead of like pushing me like that, I was like, look, like just maybe get to the point of where you're going this pace and just let me follow you, but stop telling me, we need to pick it up. You'll get here at this time and this time. Like that's not what my objective and goal is right now. Like I'm hurting pretty bad and I'm trying to push myself as is. So that was kind of one of those things. And then did run into the scenario where it was like, oh man, like, I'm just so tired. My legs hurt so bad. And you're like, really? Okay. Which comes back to like making sure that you have pacers that are like ultimately prepared for the distance that they're going to sign up for and run with
Yeah.
you.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
all that really comes down to.
Yeah. So you got into somewhere between 180 and 190, right? Is about
Yeah,
where
which is
we're
road
at.
46.
Okay. And then laid down again. What did that look like?
Yeah, so that was like probably I would say the most low that I got throughout the whole
Okay.
race.
Okay.
Yeah, I was down pretty bad. My legs hurt. I hadn't slept in like 30 hours. So at this point, I've gone like, I guess at this point, it'd be like 75, maybe more hours, 80 hours.
Hmm.
I've only slept an hour and a half. Um, I couldn't eat anything. My crew brought me like a big breakfast and I just couldn't eat it. So I was like, let me just go to bed and sleep. I slept for like 2.5 hours. Um, and I slept pretty hard, but I woke up and I was expecting to like feel good. I just woke up and felt terrible.
Oh,
I woke up, was like my body just hurt, like my feet were killing me.
yeah.
Like my feet were kind of pruny at this point. I didn't have
Oh,
trench
yeah.
foot, but they were,
Yeah.
headed that direction.
Right.
Um, I just felt weak, and I remember thinking in the back of my head, I was like, no way. I was like, there's just no way. Because Road 46 is like one of the most daunting part of the races because you're like sitting there at this flat area, you're looking up the La Salle mountain range,
Hmm.
and you know that you're sitting at mile 180, you have like 25 miles with like 8,000 feet of elevation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so like at that point, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this next section. There's no way I can keep going. And I didn't say that to anybody, but mentally, that's how I was feeling. And then I told my fiance, I was like, I just don't know if I can. She's like, well, you're going to. And she's like, so go ahead, put your shoes on and get out of the van. And I was like, okay. And it was really rough coming off of that one. Um,
Who'd you take out there with you for that section?
Yeah, so I actually took out the guy who did the last hard section with me, which was that Indian Creek to Shea Mountain. So he
Okay.
did both climbing sections with me,
Nice.
and he was well prepared. So I felt like he was the one to do it. Um, and he did really well. I mean, we knocked that first section down pretty good, which was I think that's Road 46 to Geyser Pass, or either Pole Canyon, one of the two. But you climb this like pretty hefty mountain range and get to kind of like the middle of it and I think it's like 15 miles to that aid station. And then you get to that aid station and that's where the real daunting task comes of doing like another 3,600 feet for like in 13 miles.
Oof.
Yeah, so I felt really rough there. But yeah, I got a good 2.5, 3 hours of sleep in there. And then didn't sleep completely until two more aid stations, so 30 miles after that, which would have been which would have been Geyser Pass. Um, but in between Pole Canyon to Geyser Pass, which is where the majority of that climbing comes from, I broke down pretty hard mentally. Extremely difficult section with just like what felt like nonstop climbing. I was like, when is this going to end? It's like a lot of single track trails that kind of like, bend this way. So your feet are just like,
So they're on a
com-
camber. Yeah.
yeah, and it just hurt really bad.
Mm.
40-mile-per-hour winds, a lot of like hail, and it was below freezing, and it was just brutal. And I ended up taking probably 3 to 5 2-minute naps throughout that whole section. And I think that section is where like 35% of people dropped.
Gotcha. Wow.
Um, and
What kept you moving forward?
the fact that I knew if I stopped it, I was going to pretty much freeze to death. I knew that if I
Valid.
stopped running, it was going to be extremely cold.
Yeah.
And then my pacer did a really good job in that section of being like, look, man, we're almost to mile 200. You're going to get to see the crew. You're going to get the nap, get warm. And then after that, he's like, we got this thing beat. Like, you got this thing beat, which seems crazy to think you have a race beat. You get to 200 miles and you still have 40 to go. But internally, that's what it kind of felt like.
Yeah.
And that's what he kept telling me. And we just kind of kept pushing. I mean, it was some of the slowest miles that we had the entire race. I think we got even upwards of like 35-minute miles, which is slow. It feels very slow when you're doing it.
Yeah.
Um, and we pushed it to that next station. And then actually, I got to that next aid station and I didn't test my oxygen or anything, but I was extremely confused, having extremely difficult time remembering anything. And I mean, I'd been up probably only like 20 hours, 15 hours at this point. But obviously you're, kind of operating on very minimal sleep. But my memory was almost zapped. I had a hard time like remembering where I was. It was a little scary and it kind of scared me, internally.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just need to lay down. And I ended up sleeping there for like, I stayed there. I didn't sleep there for 4 hours, but I slept for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then I stayed there for 4 hours because it was raining and it was extremely cold. And I just didn't want to get out of the van. Um, and I didn't want to start. I didn't want to like start in the rain. And I knew that I had 40 miles to go. And once I started, I wasn't going to stop. So I ended up staying at that aid station the longest out of any aid station,
Okay. And
with about.
after you got a nap, did the brain fog did that lift a little bit or no?
Yeah. So after I kind of like laid down, got some food, the brain fog kind of lifted. But from what I heard, a lot of people were coming in there with low O2
Mm.
problems. I even think like, so I think like David Goggins had a bad problem. One of the other major runners had a significant problem there as well. And I remember talking to one of the medics saying that there was like 10 to 15 people stuck back on the trail
Mm.
who couldn't proceed any further. That
What
they
kind
had.
of altitude was that? What, so what
So
height?
that's at like 10,300.
Okay. All right.
So you're pretty high up there at that
Mhm.
point.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I felt it breathing wise, but it's not like it didn't feel much different to me than anything else. Um, but at that point, like you're so delirious, you don't really know what you feel. Um, but yeah, I struggled mentally in terms of like remembering anything or with brain fog problems at that aid station pretty badly. And I remember it pretty vividly, um, kind of just not being able to put two things together about like what was actually going on, which scared me
Yeah.
when it was going on.
Did
Um,
you communicate that to anyone?
yeah, I communicated it to Natalie, and she was aware of it. And, she was like, let's just get some sleep, see how you feel. And then once I woke up, I was, a lot pretty coherent about what was going on. Um, and that helped a lot,
Good.
kind of laying down and getting some food. So it could have been a mixture of the altitude, could have been, food, it could have been a multitude of things.
Yeah.
But I think the sleep and then the lack of sleep and then the altitude probably played a pretty large role.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay. And this was the point at which you decided to do the remainder of the race solo. Is that right?
Yeah, my mom was like all geared up, ready to go, and I was like, let's hold on a minute here. And actually, myself and Natalie were the ones who were like, I think he needs to go alone. Um, and I wanted to go alone because you can't drop the pacer off at the 220 mark, so they have to stay the whole 40 miles with you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's not a pacer drop at the
Right. Gotcha.
that Porcupine Rim is not a pacer drop. So asking anyone to do 40 miles after they've been up for, four
Yeah.
straight days is
Right.
kind of unreasonable.
Yep.
So I just felt like, I did, there was more negative things that could come from bringing a pacer with you than there was the me going alone.
But mom was ready to go 40 miles.
Man, mom was ready to rock, and I was like, Mom, I think you're going to be struggling if you decide to strap up.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but kudos to her, but I didn't think it
For
was the
sure.
right decision.
Good on you too.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we've lifted the brain fog, and now we're moving solo to the finish.
Yeah.
Um, you had was that tw at 20 miles later, was that a crew stop or no?
No. So no
No,
crew stop. So
no
you
crew.
40
Last
miles.
40 miles was crewless.
Yep, that's
Drop
it.
bag?
I did have a drop bag.
One drop bag at the
So
okay.
yeah, and I didn't really take much out of there to be honest. I ended up leaving I ended up leaving um mile 200 and put a change of clothes in my pack because I was like, it's raining right now. I'm gonna wear my rain gear. And I was like, then I'm gonna drop it at the next station if it's not raining. And it wasn't raining, so I ended up switching gear to finish out the race. And that's really all I took from that drop bag is I just took a pair of socks, changed my socks, and just kept going.
Thinking back to what you said about the Nike Zagamas and how they were wet, um, what we did at Tour de France was I brought a pair of the shoe dryers. You can plug it into your power outlet in your car,
Okay.
and they go right into the shoes, and they circulate air through the shoe and actually dry them out. And I could put those in the show notes, but like if you have a race in the future, they're super handy and they're not expensive at all.
Kind of
But
like
like
those like for like snow boots, like
exactly. Yeah, but it's a travel, like it's basically a travel kit.
dang, I
Um,
didn't even know they had those type of things.
yeah, it's so compact and easy. And you can plug it into the wall or you can plug it into your car.
Oh,
But super helpful to have for especially for stuff like this, 100 milers, 200 milers,
yeah,
when your shoes get soaked and you're like, dang, I wish I had those again.
I would
Um,
highly suggest getting one of those for the people who have more
Either
rain.
that or if you have access to like the crew can get newspaper and just stuff them with newspaper because the newspaper actually absorbs the moisture.
Okay.
Within a few hours, they'll be dry as well. So, a few different things there, but just thinking upon that because I know what it's like to like lose your favorite pair of shoes due to them being soaked and not wanting to put them back on. Um, but okay, so you got to 20, not raining anymore, got to some dry clothes. You talked about the last aid station, kind of tough to get out of there just because of everything that was going on. Where were you mentally at this point?
I was actually pretty good mentally, and I think I pretty much inherited the idea that if I got to 220, that I was good. I was like, and at this point, up to mile 200, as soon as I took off, I was like, I'm gonna, there's no quitting now.
Hmm.
I'm gonna get to the end. And I kind of adopted that mindset
Yeah.
as soon as I took off. And from there on, I was good. I put in headphones, which was really the first time of the race that I used any headphones.
Hmm.
Put in headphones, and just started climbing that original climb. And then I just, at that moment, just enjoyed the race. I really just enjoyed the last 40 miles. The scenery was fantastic. The weather was awesome. And I just kind of dialed in and just made it more so about enjoying it than anything else. And I think that's kind of what carried me through that last 40 miles because I was in some pain.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but the last section, honestly, was almost one of my favorites of how pretty it was.
Nice.
Um, so it just kind of carried me through. I mean, how beautiful everything was and how beautiful everything was. And then just the idea that I was going to finish 240 miles when I'd only ran 100 miles before this was pretty awesome as well. Um, but I kind of just dialed my mindset in and that's pretty much how it went. And I got to Porcupine Rim and my legs were feeling pretty good. I did a couple miles at, 14, 60-minute pace and that was feeling pretty good. And I think that's kind of where I kind of continue to finish the race out at. Um, Speaking of stomach problems, though, I had a severe stomach problem the last 3 miles.
Oh no.
So like luckily like the last 3 miles is on a stretch of road and it's a paved walking path. So there's like plenty of bathrooms. But I had stomach problems the last like 3 miles and I'm like, okay, well, this is terrible, but I guess it's better than it happening, you know,
Yeah.
200 miles ago. Um, but it just the last 40 miles for me honestly felt like some of the easiest ones.
Nice. Nice.
Um, and that seems like unusual, but I don't really know how unusual it is for people because like it seems crazy to think that you're like only 40 miles left. Well, for 40 miles for most people is like, what? No way. But like after you just ran 200, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can knock this out and just do it comfortably. But it's
Um, I got to track you and Ben, and obviously, I probably wasn't checking in as much as your crew was.
right.
From their perspective, how was the tracking capabilities? How was cell phone reception? How was all of that for them?
Yeah, cell phone reception, I think, was pretty spotty in most case scenarios. The tracking they said was pretty accurate, but it did lag.
Mm.
They said it was lagging like a solid at times like 15 to minutes, which doesn't seem like a lot. And I mean, it shouldn't be a lot in terms of like, if you're a well-prepared crew, like you should be there like 40 minutes, 50 minutes before anyways.
Yeah.
Um, they said the tracking worked pretty well, but they did say that it was lagging at moments, which caused them to be late twice, I think, or they say that's why they were late.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of the cell phone service, there was almost every aid station except two of them were zero, nada,
Okay.
nothing.
Okay. All right.
Um,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
I mean, like the first aid station, there was absolutely no service. I had service maybe like seven different spots throughout the race, but it was pretty bare.
Did you feel pretty good about the course markings? Did you ever have to check on your phone for where the course was going, or how do you feel?
Yeah, actually, multiple times I did.
Yeah.
Uh, I was laughing originally because I went up to Shea Mountain before the race just to kind of get an idea of what things are going to look like up there. And I saw their course markings, and I'm like, this is kind of a joke. And like the ones like up there had already blown off because they're just like
Oh
lamp
no.
pieces of paper, and
Oh,
they're like stapled to like a stake.
gotcha.
And up there at 10,000 feet, those things are gonna
Yeah.
be away.
Yeah.
I didn't have any problems in terms of like the course markings, except on like the slick rock areas. Um, a lot of those slick rock areas were just, it's just natural, because there's like no technical, like no really trail there.
Hmm.
There'd be moments where like you didn't know which direction to go. But other than that, I mean, I had really no problems with the trail
Good.
marking. Did
Good.
fine.
Cool. All right. So bring us into the finish.
Yeah, so the finish of the Moab 240 pretty much takes you like right through like these crazy canyons. It's one of the most beautiful sections of the entire race. Like the last 8 miles of that race are extremely beautiful.
Nice.
You're going along like a pretty renowned mountain bike trail.
Hmm.
Pretty much over like looks over all of Moab and like these crazy canyons, which makes the run that much more enjoyable. But I got about 5 miles from the finish line and kept being like, geez, where in the hell is the finish the last like the 3 miles are all flat on that bike path, which are fine. But like the 2 to 3 miles leading up to that, like, you're on the top of this canyon, you got to work your way down to this road, and you're like, this trail's never gonna end. And then it like keeps coming in and out of these like canyons because you got to go around the rivers. Um, at this point, I'm hurting pretty bad. I'm like moving at like a 25-minute pace. Feel pretty terrible to be honest. And then I finally make it to the road. I like try to muster up enough to run the last 3 miles on the trail. It's just legs don't want to do it. So I walk, a good mile and a half on the trail, and then I end up finishing the last mile and a half, pretty much running the entire thing. And I thought I'd be a little bit more emotional when I crossed the finish line, but I was just like kind of so astounded that I was there, and then also I think so like brutally tired that I was just like, okay, we're here. Um, and then they like start asking me questions, I get like a camera in my face, like asking me questions like immediately as I cross the finish line. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm just trying to survive here. But the last section of the Moab 240 is so pretty. I mean, the entire race is beautiful, but maybe they do it that way for a reason. But it was really pretty.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So actual finish time?
It was about an hour and out or 103 hours and like 45 minutes, roughly,
Right on.
which
Right
is a
on.
lot like, it was like a little bit slower than I originally wanted. Um,
Huh.
but I think with it being my first one, I mean, I
And the
felt,
weather.
yeah, I know the weather. I try not to blame it on that, but
You can.
yeah,
And then, then you start wondering about like, well, did I need that much stoppage time? Like those are all things too.
yeah. And then like that's the thing too, is like you try to like replay that in your head,
Hmm.
you know, and like it's easy to say that after, like I should have spent less time at this station, but like you're not feeling like right now it's easy for me to say it, but I'm not feeling the
Right.
same way as I was then. You know what I
No,
mean?
totally. Yep.
Um, so it's easy to say that, but like I think
Yeah.
going back, like it's a race I would do again. And if I did do it again, I'd be a little bit more aware of that. Like,
Yeah.
I'd say, okay, like instead of spending 4 hours here, let's spend, an hour and a half here and spend it more productively and then move on. But it was my first time and
Yeah.
there's a lot of learning curves and a lot of
For
ups and
sure.
downs.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Um, I mean, uh, amazing that you went from an untrained 100 miler
Yeah.
to a Moab 240 finisher.
Yeah.
So kudos to you, man. That's awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Um, yeah, anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about, or any words of wisdom that you would give to anybody doing their first 200 or the Moab 240? Anything you'd like to share?
I think one thing is like I would suggest doing is I would definitely like get out to like where the race is, like, 3 days before, 3, 4 days before. Especially if you're like far away from it, like Utah
Mhm.
doesn't seem that far away, but that's still a 5 hour flight. And like you get out there and you do feel like a little miscombobulated the first day or so, you're trying to get kind of acclimated. So I would
Mhm.
suggest doing that to anyone who's doing one of these longer races. Get out there, and if you have the money or the resources available, go out there and maybe run a couple sections before the race. That mentally, that significantly made a difference for me for certain sections because I already knew what was coming.
Right.
That makes a huge difference. At least for me, it does.
Cool.
Um, and words of wisdom, I mean, everyone has their reasons of doing these races, and I think those reasons become more apparent personally, like when you get out to the race and start doing it. Um, but my biggest thing is break the race down, break the race down segment by segment. Don't look at it like a 240-mile race. Look at it like a multi-stage event and that you're going to do 20 miles now and then you're going to get there and you're going to tackle 20 more. Um, but really these races, I think, depending on how you train, like it can be a bit huge difference of like just like physically just like battling to get across the finish line and then like being able to enjoy getting across the finish line. I saw a lot of people like battling to get across the finish line. And it's a battle no matter who you are. But there's some people who are just like in such rough shape, and I think if you like train accordingly, obviously there's a lot of things that can go right and go wrong. But, I think if you train accordingly and don't overtrain, I think you can have like an enjoyable finish. But ultimately, it just comes down, I think, to willpower and like a mentality. But there's also a point where you have to worry about your health and your safety as well.
Sure.
But what an adventure! I mean, you can't really gain. It's like I told my parents, you can't really gain. Sounds cliche, but you can't really gain the wisdom anywhere else like that quickly
Yeah.
through, than just going and doing that.
Yep. Trial by fire.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard because you have a hard time afterwards because you're mentally in this one place and everyone around you is not necessarily in that space.
Hmm.
But you finish these type of adventures and these type of challenges and it changes you a little bit and I think it brings a greater kind of appreciation to life and difficulties in your everyday life makes things a little easier.
Awesome. Um, Not everybody, well, actually nobody was privy to our conversation prior to recording, but we always often ask, well, what's up next? And
Right.
our discussion was there's a few ideas. Do you want to discuss any of those?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, jumping from that 100 miler to 240 miles is a pretty like substantial difference. And I haven't really spent a lot of time in like the actual doing, trying to finish a long distance race like in a specific amount of time. It's more so been like, let's get across that finish line and let's
Yep.
enjoy that.
Yep.
So I think it'd be fun to kind of maybe put a little bit of a time, time restraints on a race, see if I can, do a 100 miler in like 18 hours. So possibly, the Keys 100, kind of eyeball on that one, and then eyeball on UTMB. In order to do UTMB, I think, like we talked about, got to get those credentials before being able to do that. So I think this year, maybe tackling a couple 100 miler UTMB races, and then maybe trying to tackle a kind of a time trial 100 miler at the Keys Ultra. And then I've toyed around with like a multi-day stage event like the Marathon de Sabes. But that one sells out pretty quick. And I mean, there's a couple of those type ultrathons, but we'll see. But I got to make a decision pretty quick so we can kind of get on the train.
All good. All good. And if people want to connect with you, what's a good way to connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me on social media. My Instagram is Ellis Pace. It's pretty simple. And then if anyone ever has any questions or just wants to talk or run or whatever it may be, feel free to shoot me a text, give me a call. You can reach me at 828-674-5365.
You're a brave man.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. And then it should be actually too, I mean to tell you, I have a buddy who's a videographer, and we ended up kind of just deciding to do it. It's something he wanted to do because he's trying to work on his personal documentary. So we actually kind of shot the training
Oh,
for the
cool.
last like 8 months, and he was out
Nice.
there with me. So I think we're going to do some type of he's working on it. It's his thing.
Right on.
Um, but he documented everything. So we're kind of doing like a documentary on what it takes to do these type of things in terms of
Sweet.
like more so about the personnel involved in it and less about me.
Okay.
But he'll be working on that, and he's going to premiere it probably like a theater or something and rent out a theater. So whenever
All
that
right.
comes,
Yeah,
I'll let
let us know.
you. Yeah,
That's super cool.
I'll be excited to see what he comes up with because I
Yeah.
mean, the whole race I was like so incoherent, I didn't know what he was doing.
Oh man. Well, Ellis, congratulations, man. I mean, so fantastic that you rock this one. So, and thanks for sharing your story too.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it, and thanks for all the advice and the coaching. And couldn't done it without you.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much, Ellis, for all of your time. My goodness, we went a lot longer than either of us had anticipated, but it was so worth it. I really enjoyed that. And it was so nice to kind of debrief in this way and go so deep into a conversation and get so much detail, from a race of such magnitude. We typically, with my athletes, we do debrief. After a race, I try to encourage the athletes to set up a phone call or a Zoom call so that we can kind of discuss, all of this. But typically, that's it lasts somewhere between a half hour and an hour. But this was really nice to kind of go through so deep. So thank you, Ellis, for all of your time and for sharing your story. And once again, congratulations on such an amazing finish. And as I kind of mentioned, my next interview is going to be with Ben Gons. Ben has been on the podcast previously, having finished the Cocodona 250 last year. Ben will be talking about the Triple Crown that he just completed, having finished Tahoe 200, Bigfoot 200, and Moab 240. So we're going to have hopefully a great conversation with him and kind of go through, all the ins and outs of this. Talking about the logistics and the challenges that it presented. So stay tuned for that conversation. That will be coming up probably next week. So I'm looking forward to that conversation myself. So anyhow, man, it has been another great week. Maybe you saw on social media or maybe you hadn't, but the cross-country team that I coach, the West Henderson Falcons, we had our regional meet, which serves as our state qualifier. And now in North Carolina, there are 8 divisions, if you will, and we are 5A. Our region is the West, so we had the 5A West region at the Tryon Equestrian Center. Beautiful course, an old golf course, really nicely done. Very well managed, very well done. Really enjoyed the course. The kids enjoyed the course. It was a great day. Our race was pretty late in the day. The boys raced at 3:45 and the girls at 4:15. So a bit later in the day for a Saturday meet, but they had a lot of the other divisions earlier in the day. So we were the last division. Thankfully, the course was dry, so the course remained in great condition. And the kids had simply a great race. It was so much fun to watch these kids. On the boys' side, my underclassmen really, they shine through. I had one junior, two sophomores, and two freshmen that constituted our top 5. So all will be returning next year. The goal was to qualify for states. The top 6 in the region qualified for the state meet. The boys finished 5th, so they will be going to the state meet. Super excited for them. We do have 2 seniors that are in the top 7, and that kind of rounds out who will be competing for us at the state meet. So excited for them and that opportunity, especially being so young. They're getting so much great experience for what's to come. So very excited for the boys. And on the girls' side, my daughter was racing. A young lady who's our number 1 runner. She led it from the gun, and it was so exciting to watch. She had a fantastic day and ended up winning the region, taking first overall over a competitor that is a very, very good runner. So I was so proud of her. It was so great to see her take the overall win. My daughter saw me with maybe a quarter mile left, maybe a little bit more, and I told her she's got a kick, and she did. She caught at least 3 girls between when I saw her and the finish, to finish 9th place and top 10, earn all region honors. So she, as a freshman, earned all region honors. Just super fantastic. The girls that rounded out our top 5, our first girl is a senior, but my daughter being a freshman, and then we had a junior and 2 sophomores. So again, just a tremendous future for these kids. We went 1, 9, 13, 14, 15, and secured 2nd place overall. Which was awesome, as a team to take 2nd place in the region. And the girls obviously will be moving on to the state meet. The state meets this weekend in Kernersville, North Carolina. We race on Saturday. The boys race at 9 a.m. and the girls at 10:20 a.m. So we'll be over in Kernersville for that. So super excited for that. Yeah, lots happening there, which is super cool. So far as my training goes, I've really just been setting up my base, really trying to get into this training for the uphill athlete, just digging deep, and that's kind of where today's topic comes from. So, talking about what I'm doing, I'm really just monitoring my heart rate. So, trying to maintain really, super aerobic effort, and that's what we're going to talk about, is why that's super important in the base phase and where that comes from, because I think a bunch of people kind of miss that point and why it's so important to have that effort. So we're going to start with the basics today and really talk about the basics, and then we'll get more into detail in future episodes. So just really building up the length of my runs. Just going to take some time because that's, when I look at where my paces are right now, that's what my body really needs, is that super solid aerobic base. Since, the reality is the challenge I'm doing December, I can, continue to train as such and work on that aerobic base, since it's simply just mileage and kind of managing the efforts. So that kind of aligns perfectly with what I'm doing. I don't have any real races until I signed up for the South Mountains half marathon in January. If it's possible, we may have a race that day. We'll see. But I signed up for South Mountains half marathon, and I also signed up for the Mount Mitchell Heartbreaker in I think that's March 21st. So signed up for those. Whether I get to do those or not due to other commitments, we'll see. But I hope to. love those events, love to take part in them if I can. But other than that, I just kind of have to wait to see how the Hard Rock Lottery goes and then go from there. So we shall see. Having further conversations with my wife because I have other ideas in my head, which, we'll see what transpires, what happens. But that's, thoughts for 2026. In the interest of what the uphill athlete, training for the uphill athlete, kind of talks about, you can kind of listen to what Tom Evans and what Ruth Croft have done during their training. A lot of it is simply uphill hiking with weighted vests. They did Stairmaster with weighted vest, all to work on muscular endurance, which is this kind of new term, which we'll kind of get into in a future podcast as well, and talk about this kind of philosophy of training, this component of training, if you will. But what I have access to right now, even though I've got the mountains around, sometimes having the equipment available is very handy. And obviously I have a great treadmill. It goes up to 40%. I have one of the Nordic Track commercial grade treadmills that goes up to 40%, which is a fantastic resource, and I used a lot in training for Tour de Jaunt. But I went on to Facebook Marketplace and found a Stairmaster for $125. So I couldn't pass that deal. A bit of a drive to go get it. Just hooked up my trailer and drove to Cummings, Georgia. Grabbed the Stairmaster and brought it back here. So I'm setting that up in my basement. At some point, I'll probably do a YouTube video of what my basement looks like now, because we have a lot of equipment. I mean, it's almost like a full gym down there with all the strength training equipment and, the machines that we have. I'm pretty fortunate in that regard, to have this, this availability to me, which, I certainly want to make it available to my athletes as well. If they need access to something, especially if they need to cross train, I want to make it readily available to them, if they're, local here to Western North Carolina. But anyhow, getting into today's topic, which is the metrics or efforts by which we track our running. What is our gauge? What are we looking at? We're gonna get more into down the road specificity and talking about the different efforts and where they come from, and there are a number of scales even for each of these that can be discussed, and I'll kind of give my viewpoint of what I use and why. Uphill athlete, training for the uphill athlete, they are very big on heart rate. And whereas like CTS is very big on rating of perceived exertion, and again, it's going to depend on what you're training for. As Ellis and I kind of talked about, he's thinking of doing the Keys 100, which we want to make a certain pace very sustainable. So we're going to have to work on certain aspects of it, but the foundation is going to come from heart rate, as I discussed, or as Ellis discussed. Heart rate was our basis for training, and that's going to be the primary driver, because that gives us the knowledge that we're working the correct system. And as I'm kind of more on board with what the training for the uphill athlete does. I like to make sure that efforts are within a certain range, because then we're working specific systems. I understand all of the ideas and reasons behind rating of perceived exertion, and I do use rating of perceived exertion with certain runners, and I'll talk about the instances in which I use each. But I do have preference for using heart rate, because then I know specifically that they're working in the correct range of which I'm looking. So let's kind of get into this, and I'm going to start with heart rate training, simply because that's basically what I use the most. Now, Training for the Uphill Athlete, if you've read it, works in a 5-zone system. Now, their system is slightly different than the system that I use. It's close, and they have a very good reason for using what they do. I'm just used to my system, so whether I change that or not, I haven't decided yet. But I use basically, 10-point scale. So, zone 1 is anywhere from 0 to 59% of maximum heart rate. Zone 2, 60 to 69%. Zone 3, 70 to 79%. Zone 4, 80 to 89%. And Zone 5, 90 to 100%. And that's how I break down the 5-zone system. Now, with that said, is it perfect? No, I don't. And as Training for the Uphill Athlete notes, there is no perfect system, and there are multiple ones out there. That's just what I use, and that's what I'll be referencing. And that's what gives me a good idea. And you could set it up differently. It's just what you get used to, obviously, or what you prefer. That's, again, what I've been using for some time, so I'm used to looking for certain numbers. What's great about Training Peaks is then I can then program into the specific runs, and that's how I program my athletes that are using heart rate. I program in specific thresholds within the run. So as Ellis said, he knew the parameters for which I was looking. There was a maximum that I gave him, right? And with Training Peaks, it uploads to your watch, and then so does the heart rate range. So then if you're running, it will give you an alarm if your watch is set up to give you an alarm if the heart rate is getting too high, which can be tough on the long runs. Listening to Tom Evans talk, he they were pushing the heart rate up a little bit on some of the climbs. That's harder to program. The specific, obviously, pieces of that, trying to time climbs in a run, whereas you can also just increase the peak, if you will, the peak heart rate for the run, understanding that we only want to see those on the climbs. So communication is key between a coach and an athlete, to let the athlete understand that, if they're on a flat or a downhill, they don't want that, that heart rate in that upper range. They want to, I have to communicate, just as I have a young man that I'm working with, and I said, hey, listen, I know you can get your heart rate up here, but I want to make sure that you're capped at this number here. Okay, so don't let the heart rate on the flat or downhills get above this number. Even though it says you can get up to this, that's when you hit an uphill. Okay, so that can be programmed, but the communication has to be clear as to what are our expectations. Okay, so yeah, I love that component of Training Peaks, because I can be specific about how hard do I want the efforts, both in just regular runs and in workouts, right? So for I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was doing a long run, and I was allowing myself to get into zone 3, but I didn't want to get into zone 4. Again, thinking on my scale, right, that I referred to earlier, and I cap zone 3 at 78% of maximum heart rate. And that came from Matt Fitzgerald's 80-20, where he talks about the ventilatory threshold. We've talked about it in the past. Above 78% of maximum heart rate, we start to get into more of the LT1, or lactate threshold 1, which we'll get into down the road. So I try to keep my maximum heart rate in a run that I'm going to run zone 3 below 78% of maximum heart rate. So, knowing that, I know ahead of time, okay, I don't want to let my heart rate get above X number, okay? Now, with my long run yesterday, today I just went out for an easy run, and I wanted it zone 2, recovery, okay? So I didn't want my heart rate to get above 123, okay? So I had a cap, just went super easy. It was raining and cold, so I just took a jog outside, kept it pretty short, but I wanted to get the blood pumping and get my legs moving. but kept it relatively easy. So this block that I'm doing is not going to be very very exciting, right? So if you look at my Strava, all you're going to see is just volume, and it's either going to be zone 2 or zone 3 or a mix of the two. I've basically been running back and forth on my road just to kind of get the aerobic base going again. I haven't really incorporated many hills just yet because my pace doesn't really warrant it just yet. I need to do some work before I really get going into the hills and letting the heart rate get a little bit higher at this point because, my aerobic base just is not quite substantial enough to do all that yet. And I have time and patience, so that's why I'm doing it this way. The first time I did this was in 2020, and it really built me up. And as you can read in Uphill Athlete, if you take the time to do this, this can last you a number of years, and it did for me. It lasted from 2020 to about 2022, which is where I raced Bigfoot. And after Bigfoot, I really didn't take the time to really do it again, but I needed to, and I haven't since, and I think that's what I'm feeling the effects of, in the past couple of years, is just I haven't taken the time to rebuild that aerobic capacity, and so that's what I'm working on now, is rebuilding that. So taking a few months and just going to kind of do the work and hopefully reap the benefits from it later on. So, with heart rate, okay, we know exactly what we're getting. We know exactly what we're working. And now, that said, it has to be coming from a reliable source. I'm using Wahoo's ticker, okay, so it's their chest heart rate monitor. Obviously, chest heart rate is picking up the electrical impulse of the heart and transferring that, or cueing your watch as to where your heart rate is. Now, watch technology is getting better and better. I recognize that the optical technology is getting better and better. When it first started, I could not get it to work. So many things had to be perfect. I had to have the watch in the perfect place. It had to be a certain tightness. And now it is getting better. I did a run one day with just my wrist watch just to see where it was at, and the next day put on my chest heart rate, and it's not far off. I've been kind of reluctant with the Coros armband. A few of my athletes have used the Coros armband, but that seems to come in kind of low. I'm noticing a lot of lower heart rate than the reality. So I haven't, I think it's getting better. I don't think they have the algorithm exactly right for that technology, but it is getting better. But I am not as trusting of that, that technology just yet. Again, it has to be in a specific point, specific tightness, So starting to get better on the watches, but the biggest thing that I really trust is the chest heart rate monitor, which Ellis talked about during the episode. He had to get one for himself. So using the chest heart rate monitor to provide accurate data. We also have to know potentially what the max heart rate is. So a lot of times we do kind of our own test, just a workout to try to get the heart rate as high as we can and kind of see, does that line up with what we're seeing, along with training is, how does that feel? So we want to make sure we dial in all of the aspects of this so that the zone's set up properly and that, we're doing what's correct. Obviously, a lab test would be the best thing. That's kind of the most ideal scenario to kind of get your maximum heart rate, as well as like your LTs, LT1 and LT2. Which again we'll talk about more later. But if we miss these zones, that's the biggest thing. Is if we are training outside of these zones all the time, we're missing a huge chunk of the training. We're missing a huge building of your cardiovascular and aerobic building. And so that's why it's so important, especially when we're doing LT work. If you're above the LT in an anaerobic, you're working the wrong system and you're running too hard, and you're going to have to take more recovery time. It's a really tough system to hit, and that's why I'm not the biggest fan of either pace or RPE, the other two metrics that we'll talk about. So, it's very difficult. Heart rate is not glamorous. It can be very frustrating. So it's not for everyone. And I understand that. And that is why some of my athletes run by RPE. Now, RPE, or rating of perceived exertion, I use a scale of 1 to 10. There are, a number of different scales out there, and everybody's scales are different, and that's, again, something you have to communicate with an athlete. Or, if you have a coach, the coach needs to communicate with you so you are on the same page as to what's expected from a certain given number, on that RPE scale. So when I assign RPE, if the person has heart rate that they trust, we can then learn, okay, this is what a specific effort should feel like, and that's something that, they can go for a run and enjoy the run, and then I can provide them more feedback based off of the heart rate data so that they understand, okay, yeah, that was a little bit harder than what we want, so let's dial it back. So we start dialing in the effort. So even though they're not running by heart rate, if I can get heart rate as a metric, I can provide, some accurate feedback to them as to how they're doing and what's going on. Are they hitting the right efforts? So that they learn those efforts, because that is important, especially in ultra, that they learn what an all-day effort is, what is sustainable, right? That's big, and our easy days should be extremely easy. We always talk about recovery on this podcast. We want to make sure, again, that those efforts, especially those threshold efforts, are hitting the right effort. So that takes some time and some challenge to get to know, and that's where that coaching feedback can come, as long as we have something to provide the feedback with. It becomes more challenging when we don't have that metric, that heart rate metric, to provide that feedback. Sometimes then we have to bring in the pace. Right. And, that's more of a challenge. In the marathon, a lot of people like to train by pace because, the reality is they have a goal time and they want to reach that goal time. So they want to make sure they can run that pace. And there are some great pace calculators out there. Now, with running by pace, there's a number of things. One of the more popular ones that I use is the Macmillan calculator, and I can put that into the show notes. But it usually asks for some recent performance to base this all off of, so that it can kind of see where you're at and where it can say, here's where you're at, here's where you need to be, and hopefully you're on where you need to be in order to train at those paces for the projected finish time, the goal marathon time. So, in those instances, sometimes we do use pace, because people, they do obsess about pace. That's just, they get worried, I'm not going to be able to run this pace. But, some people are able to trust the process. It just depends on the person and where they're at. I have athletes that can't do heart rate, so we plug in RPE or pace and work by those metrics so that they feel more comfortable. But I am watching the metrics to make sure we're not going too hard and provide the feedback based off of what I'm seeing. I also read their comments. That's another huge thing that kind of alerts me to how it was. Like, this was really challenging today. And looking at the pace, well, yeah, it was a bit faster than we're used to seeing you run. So looking at feedback and providing feedback, that's huge if we're working in RPE or pace. It's obviously huge in heart rate training as well. Comments are always a huge component because we want to make sure that the person continues to feel good. That's the goal, right? We don't want them feeling crummy the whole time. Training has to be enjoyable. So there's multiple components to how we make it enjoyable, and the metrics can be a piece of that. So yes, there are times where RPE is used. There are times when pace is used, but my primary indicator is heart rate and running by heart rate, which can be, again, all of them have their challenges and their hangups. So it just depends on the person, and that's something that a coach has to work with an athlete on, because again, enjoyment should be at the forefront as well. We certainly want to make sure they reach their goal, so that's a conversation to be had pad is what's going to, provide the most benefit to the runner so that they can reach their goal. So there has to be some kind of, I would say, give and take on each side. We have to be able to work on both sides and give and take just a bit on each side. So that can be challenging, I know. But using those metrics, those are the three that I would say. Training Peaks has a great extra piece in there for reading metrics of pace. We can look at the IF score. And there's ways to go about that in training as well. Looking at how fast it was, and that's just understanding how fast it is based on the surface and the elevation gain. So there's things to consider, but you can also obviously look at pace using what we call the intensity factor or IF score, or the normalized graded pace, and that's the NGP. That can be found in Training Peaks, and Strava also has a similar component within it. So, if you're not running on the roads or running completely flat, you can use that NGP to kind of compare run to run and kind of see, where you're at, what would have been. It doesn't necessarily take into account the surface on which you're running, because obviously there are slower surfaces, but it takes into account the elevation gain and descent to kind of give you an average or an estimate as to what that would have been on a flat, even surface. So there are ways to kind of check the pacing and train by pacing. I'm not saying it's the worst of the three. It's just the one that I use the least, because I prefer the others, because obviously our bodies understand the metric of heart rate. That's what the body works off of. How long in time, how are we spending it at that heart rate? That's the work really that we're doing, right? Not the pace or the distance. So we've talked about that multiple times as well. So that's why I'm not as big of a fan of it. But again, there are circumstances where we use it and reasons why we do use it. So those are the metrics by which we train. Next time, we'll dive deeper into what are these specific adaptations we're getting from running at these various thresholds, the aerobic thresholds, the lactate thresholds, the anaerobic thresholds. So we'll get deeper into those, and it may be that we break, each episode up into one of those, talking about the aerobic threshold. What's the benefit of running within the aerobic threshold, and then talk about the lactate threshold, because each one is its own piece of training, and there's a lot that goes into that. And we've talked about some of that in the past, but always good to talk about these things. So if this, pops up questions, if you have questions about any of the things or comments about any of the things that I've presented here, happy to hear those. I'm certainly trying to evolve my knowledge as well. Reading The Uphill Athlete, there's certain things that I don't necessarily agree with. I think we have to read and make sure that we don't just take everything at face value sometimes. So, I will say that I've come across a few times where they've talked about a certain piece of the content that I just say, well, I'm going to flag that and talk to my athletes about it. This is a book that I'm reading with all of my athletes that I coach. We're discussing this as a team. We're just going kind of 2 chapters at a time and discussing, what we're learning so that they understand the training process. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to go over today. And I really appreciate you guys listening this deep. I know this was a long podcast, so thank you for being so patient and listening with that. And what an incredible weekend we had, not only with my high school athletes, but the runners I coach. I had 3 different 100-mile races going on, people running in 100-milers. I had, three different marathons people were at, half marathon that 3 runners were at, 2 50Ks, and actually 2 half marathons. So yeah, lots of racing this past weekend. It's that kind of season, but yeah, lots of racing going on, and it's really fun to kind of share in this, because we're getting to the peak season for a lot of the runners. So it keeps me busy, that's for sure. I'm always checking in, especially week of race. This weekend's another big race weekend, so kind of checking in on the athletes, having lots of conversations, both ahead of the races, as we talked about with Ellis, and like behind the after the races. So lots going on. So I actually had a few new people that are hopping on board, which is awesome. Still have some room for people. If you're interested in talking about coaching, head over to my website, runningislife.run, and let's set up a conversation so we can talk about it. So thank you again, everybody, for listening and for being a part of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Ellis. Ellis, congratulations once again. And again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please reach out. But until next time, my friends, keep moving forward. Running is life.